All right, with that, it is my pleasure to introduce our next and final keynote speaker for the conference. Joy Pullmann is executive editor of the Federalist. Her latest book is False Flag, which I think she's got copies of over there. False Flag, Why Queer Politics Mean the End of America. A happy wife and the mother of 6 children. Her ebooks include the new 300 classic books for ages 9 to adult, the best-selling classics books for young children, and 101 strategies for living well amid inflation. An 18-year education and politics reporter, Joy has testified before nearly 24 legislatures on education and policy and appeared on major media outlets including Tucker Carlson, CNN, Fox News, NewsMax, Ben Shapiro, Dennis Prager. Joy is a grateful graduate of the Hillsdale College Honors in Journalism program who identifies as Native American and gender natural. I love that. Joy is also the co-founder of a high-performing Christian classical school and the author and co-author of classical curricula. Her traditionally published books also include The Education Invasion, How Common Core Fights Parents for Control of American Kids, from E-Encounter Books. It is my pleasure now to introduce to you Joy Pullmann.
Good morning, everyone. I am so glad to be here. It's beautiful Mountain West. My husband is from Montana, so it's such a blessing to us every time I get to come, and I'm sending him pictures of the mountains just to pester him all morning while he's working. Thank you all for being here. We're going to have Q&A after the speech, so just get your questions ready. Feel free to write them out as I speak. According to demographer Nicholas Eberstadt, for the first time in human history since the bubonic plague in the medieval 1300s, the global population is declining. The world's fertility rate just hit a 60-year low, and it is set to keep decreasing. The nations at replacement rate fertility are largely terrible places where people die young, such as Somalia, the Congo, and Afghanistan. The United States faces a population bomb of not too many people, but too few. We're a slight outlier among Western nations in losing our population at a slightly slower rate than many of the other Western nations, but only narrowly. And that is entirely due to importing foreigners whose families on average require larger outlays from our ailing welfare state and who mostly worship pagan gods. Using foreigners to mask our population decline makes the nation's problems worse because it more quickly erases the traditional American Christian culture required to return our nation to freedom under self-governance. It is also an anti-life policy because open borders facilitate child trafficking. Children who are trafficked are at much higher risk for early deaths via dangerous travel routes, abuse, and drug addictions. The Biden administration lost track of some 300,000 trafficked children, tens of thousands of whom authorities still cannot find. Contrary to widespread claims that most people aren't having enough kids because they don't have enough money, the nations with the lowest birth rates are much wealthier than the nations with the highest birth rates. While money is certainly useful for raising children, all over the world and in our own American history, people are and have been much poorer while having many more children. Indeed, and more to the point at this pro-life conference, research shows that abortifacients, not the lack of money, are the top driver of the world's population bomb, which has consequences really that include financial and civilizational collapse. This is a very serious issue because our countries are basically upside-down welfare states, that basically pay out benefits to the older people that young people have to pay for. If you don't have young people, you have a lot of elderly people who don't have provision in their old age. So because this is an area of deliberate confusion among abortion apologists, such as our mass media and mass education ecosystems, let me be very clear about what I mean when I say abortifacients as the top driver of this problem. I actually include in that term not just elective chemical abortions like Plan B, but also the vast majority of what we usually call contraceptives. because the truth is the pill and IUDs can kill babies too. I thank God that years ago, actually this is 2014, so more than a decade ago, when I was considering using a contraceptive because the babies were coming quite fast, I read articles by Dr. Donna Harrison, who also spoke here this week. And in them, she explained that the science that everyone in our country needs to know. Just about every form of chemical contraception may be able to cause abortions by starving tiny embryos to death. So the pill can do this, and so can IUDs. So, scientifically speaking, chemical contraception likely does cause abortions. It means it is a scientific fact that chemical contraceptives are abortifacients. That means that for Christians, it is a grave moral evil to use these kinds of contraception. It also means that our forefathers were right in objecting to contraceptive use on other moral grounds, namely the refusal to welcome life within a marriage. A minority of churches and pastors teach this, but they simply have to. Every Christian needs to know that he or she could become a murderer by using chemical contraception. For anyone, by the way, who is grieved in his or her heart by learning or discussing these facts, I do want to mention, as always, that God always will forgive you if you repent. Jesus Christ died for these sins too. But the point here is that abortion is a lot bigger than even many pro-lifers do realize. And it's not just the estimated 63 million elective abortions performed in the United States between Roe versus Wade and Dobbs v. Jackson. There are likely tens of millions or more that no one knows even happened simply as a result of the mass civilizational use of chemical contraceptions. That means that contraception, or abortion in other words, is now an unquestioned way of life for Americans, and increasingly for people all over the world. And that is why we're having a civilizational crisis. This means hundreds of millions of lives in our entire societies are built upon ensuring the deaths of tens of millions of tiny, unknown little children. Our entire ways of life, our cultural scripts and our expectations are built around the cornerstone that most women will use abortifacients, including most Christian women. And this cornerstone emanates from the ungodly demand from feminist ideology that we treat men and women as interchangeable, something I talk about in my recent book, False Flag. It connects feminism to the queer ideology that we're all marinating in today. The truth is, men and women simply are not interchangeable. The Bible says, male and female, he created them. As pro-life Christians, we must work to establish Christian cultural scripts that welcome life. I'm going to talk about a lot of them in the rest of this speech. So that starts with recognizing that men and women are different, and that the chief goal of any career or education is to serve a family, not an ego or a bank account. So let me talk about a few ways that we need to change our ways of life within our Christian churches and homes to support a pro-life culture that do not rest on the unchristian and anti-life expectations that women will take abortifacients, or that young people should prioritize starting their families last. Every change that we want needs to start with us, in our own lives, our families, and our churches. A friend who is a professor at a Catholic university recently shared with me that the parents of his female students come in insisting that their daughters get the top classes, engage in sports, and take other efforts to get scholarships, have a clear path to a good paying career upon graduation, make all the right internships, and select the best extracurriculars. Now, there's not necessarily anything wrong with that. I believe that a robust education can prepare women well for our primary vocations as wives and mothers. What's wrong is what my friend told me was missing. He also said that in contrast, the parents of young men do not typically do the same type of type A hustle for their sons. This is very weird, because if our society really wanted to support women, we would support women's life-giving capacity, which means making space in young women's lives not for full-time careers, but for full-time motherhood. Now, there's nothing wrong with women earning scholarships. I graduated from college debt-free thanks to scholarships, and I'm very grateful to all those who made that possible, because it made my marriage after graduation so much easier with half of the debt load that we would have had otherwise. My husband and I had a faster path to saving up a down payment for a house because of those scholarships. And we needed a house pretty quick because our 6 children were born within 9 years, with the first arriving on our first anniversary. I was nursing babies for nearly 10 years straight. I kept a little tracker. It was 93% of the first 10 years of our marriage. And as you can imagine, I hardly remember anything about those years. What I learned from that is that it is cruel to ask women to be mothers and to work full-time at the same time. Compassion for women and for children means making it possible for women to mother their children. If anyone gets pushed towards careers, it should be the men, not the women. Women should be encouraged towards motherhood and careers compatible with motherhood, and men towards fatherhood and careers that are good for fatherhood. Women need to be released from the anti-woman, anti-family pressure to pursue their careers in a manly fashion, which is to say full-time, full throttle. I actually work part-time at the Federalist and have done so since I started there. And what's more, much of my work is flexible, so I can drop it for a little bit if I have a sick child or a fussy baby. I also probably have written 80% of the things that I've written professionally while nursing a baby, typing one-handed. It is very silly, and you can't take pictures of that for obvious reasons, but it would make a great social media post if you could. Women really want those kinds of jobs, and they can be compatible with putting their families first. But many employers instead push non-family care as if children need mothers and fathers in exactly the same way. But they don't. Little children need their mothers physically present for the vast majority of their waking hours. Ask me how I know. I will say, so I limit my speaking engagements pretty intensely, so thank you all for hosting me here. It's one of the 4 that I'm doing this year, and I usually do in a year. Even though I'm only gone for 2 days, I know when I come home, my 2 littlest ones, who are now 5 and 7, they're going to need a lot more time sitting on my lap. We're going to spend some time together with some activities. They need to reestablish that bond with their mother, because it is difficult for them just for 2 days to be away from their mother. And if it's difficult for them for 2 days for children who I'm intensely close with since their conception, just imagine what it would be like if they were away from me 45 hours a week for all of their little lives. So although it's been suppressed for political reasons, substantial research actually shows that children start showing signs of psychological and behavioral problems when their time away from their mother extends past 15 to 20 hours per week. And this is why I've never had a babysitter more than 6 hours per week for my children. And I thank God that He's made it possible for me to be able to do that. In the early years of our marriage, my husband and I basically worked opposite shifts so that we, could take care of our first son while paying off college debt and getting ready for a house. And so that was difficult. I don't want to do it again, but I am glad that we are able to be with our son rather than anybody else. But we also don't need research to tell us what simple observation and common sense can tell us. First grade and kindergarten teachers always know which children coming into their classrooms have gone to daycare or preschool because those children act out more often and they're more emotionally dysregulated. Research also shows that to be true. And if you're curious about that, if you just go look at my Pinterest, Joy Pullman on Pinterest, I have an entire board full of research called early childhood research. So go ahead, there's a bunch of studies there that you can get into the weeds on if you like. So all of this means that churches need to reevaluate the daycare and the preschool programs that they offer. They should offer low hours options such as a few mornings or afternoons a week and encourage families to use those options instead of full-time care if at all possible. Kindergarten and preschool would ideally be half-day as well. For children who must be in non-parent care for most of their days, such as with a single mother who needs to support her family alone, churches should try to help place her children with a family or an at-home grandma, or rather than providing overstimulating center-based programs with a large caregiver-to-child ratio and frequent staff turnover. Christians should publicly advocate for government to support family-based care when it is giving out money for such things, and for employers to accommodate children both for mothers and fathers at work as much as those employers can while not going broke. And I don't know about you, but if you work for a big corporate company, you know that they spend tons of money on practically garbage all the time that they could redirect towards making it more possible to have better benefits for parents of small children that don't involve pushing them to kill their children. And for example, instead of offering to freeze women's eggs and do IVF procedures that have high death counts for babies, we should encourage as Christians that employers offer part-time and flexible work to mothers whenever they can. Parents, teachers, pastors, and career counselors should steer young people into adulthood with as little debt as possible. Socially, I've been talking about this 15, 20 years while speaking different places, and it has become over those years pretty increasingly easy to encourage young people to avoid college debt. But there is still a gap between people recognizing that young people need that financial freedom and our society making it possible and the norm for men to earn a family-supporting wage by their mid-20s. Parents should be at least as concerned about their sons' career paths as they are about their daughters, and they should be talking with their daughters about work differently than they do their sons, because sons and daughters are different. And I'm not only using the anecdote of my professor friend's experience to support that position either. For decades now, I think this is also pretty well known, young men have been earning fewer college degrees of all kinds. And we now have the largest population in American history of prime working age men who don't have disabilities who are not working. That's 1 in 6 men aged 25 to 54. And 1 in 8 of the men in that range aren't even looking for work. The research, which also has been collected pretty well by a book by Nicholas Eberstadt, if you're interested in that, his book is called Men Without Work. It shows that most of these men are spending their days playing video games and watching movies. This is obviously a complete reversal of what is good and natural. Our culture pretty much has everything backwards. We have large numbers of men refusing to provide for others and women refusing to provide children to anyone. Those are literally the linchpin roles that men and women respectively play in society as a natural outgrowth of our God-given biological capacities. Obviously, men can't bear children, and women also cannot protect themselves or keep all the sewers and the farms running as well as men can. If you think I'm wrong, I challenge you to try. I grew up on a farm. I can drive the tractor, but the lifting of the hay bales part, not so great. Another way that our ways of life stamp out human biology is that schools tend to be set up as a woman's world. But the truth is, and I have 4 sons, so I also viscerally experience this, the average boy does not turn into a great man when he is raised mostly by women. We know this because boys raised without fathers always talk about it as a massive challenge that they must battle, sometimes for their entire lives. Boys become the best and the strongest men through the mentorship of other good men. But our society has decided to prioritize the mentorship of women and ignore men. One harbinger of this is what used to be called the Boy Scouts, which is now called Scouts because it admits both boys and girls. So now the girls get 2 scouting organizations to choose from, and the boys get half of one. Our churches must fill in this gap because it is a spiritual gap driven by a false theology that says men and women are the same. We need to encourage parents to raise their boys, not as defective girls. This means cheerful and meaningful discipline. Directing boys' natural aggression into positive behaviors demands firm, loving, prompt discipline. I struggle with this, so my husband has to give me regular pep talks. We take a nightly walk most days, and so on that I'll bring up any parenting challenges I'm experiencing, and mostly he will just say, here is what the consequence that you should apply to this child for this behavior next time he does it. And I go, okay. Try to steel myself to enforce it when it occurs the next day. So mothers really need to listen to fathers about discipline, especially for their sons, and allow their husbands to administer and direct that discipline instead of turning their sons into weaklings by getting in the way of their husband's instinctive knowledge of what boys need. Our schools need to encourage boy-friendly pedagogy such as memorizing facts, competition, pushing for excellence instead of giving blue ribbons to everyone, and seeking to employ male teachers who are paid a bread-winning family wage. Our church body must not make it impossible for our schools to pay breadwinner wages to men by burdening schools and churches with highly expensive health insurance and pension plans that take from the young to pay for the old. While it is very easy and popular in our society to beat up on lazy men, it is not as easy and popular to beat up on child-averse women who don't respect men or their own biology. And by the way, I count myself as one of those women. In order to get my husband to marry me, I had to basically contractually agree to have kids, which in my mind meant 1, maybe 2. Obviously, he won that battle. But I would say, on that count, that what really helped me transform my thinking on that was his patient leadership of our home and our family, and his encouragement and support of the fact that we have children and he wants them, and he thinks it is great that I do all of that work with my own body. And so his leadership in that has, really converted me as a former feminist. I think other people could do the same in their own personal lives. To be truly pro-life, we need to communicate to women that children are not only good and blessings, but they are also the only thing on earth that we might be able to take with us into eternity. And dedicating our lives to raising our children is more meaningful than shuffling paper in an office. It is not pro-life to communicate to your daughter that her womb needs to be chemically castrated with a pill until she's 35 and her ovaries start to decline. That communicates to her that money matters more than children, which is false. Children matter more than money, and where God gives children, he will provide for them. We need to hear this in our catechism classes, in our schools, and from our pulpits, and I thank the pastors who do this, and I know it is difficult. Keep going. When pastors lovingly rebuke women for the sins that we tend to fall into, just as they also lovingly rebuke their men for their type of sins, women need to accept that rebuke and not make their pastor's life miserable for telling us the truth. That is their job. As a church, we also need to catechize our people better, especially about biological science. Every Christian child needs to know that chemical contraception can kill a human life, and that this is wrong and we must never participate in it. These are scientific and moral facts, and we must build a church culture that respects such facts of biology and welcomes children rather than treating them like an obstacle and burden. The Bible teaches in Proverbs that a good man leaves an inheritance to his children's children. We need to instruct our people in the stewardship of wealth that results in reversing our American culture's habit of enabling the elderly to steal from the young. It is the duty of the old to sacrifice for the young, of parents and grandparents to give up our comforts for the benefits of our children. God gives children partly to sanctify parents and grandparents and challenge our natural selfishness. Of course, this doesn't mean that children should be idols or that we should disregard the needs and weaknesses of old age. Of course. The Bible commands families to care for and provide for their own, and there are mutual duties of care between young and old. The young to nurture and provide for the young and to raise them to maturity and capability of self-government, and for the young to return these gifts when the old no longer can provide for themselves. Being pro-life obviously includes respecting the dignity and the lives of the elderly. But today the social contract is very lopsided against the young and in favor of the elderly in an ungodly way. So I'm going to give an uncomfortable example. Our society spends massive amounts of money trying to extend the lives of the elderly just a few more months when Christians are commanded not to fear death. And indeed we are told that to live is Christ and to die is gain. Especially, I think pastors will have some experience with this, but I don't know how many lay people do, but I have many elderly friends in my own congregation, and I have heard from them at the end of their lives, with sobs sometimes. I don't know, why God doesn't just let me die, because dying is good, right? We're going to Jesus, we've run our race, and sometimes I have wondered, well, how many prescription meds are you taking? Maybe you would have died, and that God had prepared for that, but artificially extending and propping that up. So obviously, as a completely pro-life person, from natural conception to natural death, I would never advocate killing the sick or elderly for any reason at any time. But it is not murder for people to die naturally when their time has come. It is Christian to face death bravely and not spend your children's inheritance trying to gain another few months or years after a full life because you fear death like a pagan. Money is not just an abstract concept. It represents a part of someone else's life because people must give their time and their labor, a portion of their life, to earn any money they have, unless they're stealing it, of course. Taking someone else's money is therefore taking a part of his life. And as we pro-lifers know, it is wrong to take someone else's life without his conviction for example, a capital crime. So while I may not have this all worked out myself, I do call on our pastors and theologians to develop and distribute Christian counsel about end-of-life situations that includes looking at whether it is consistent with Christian ethics to get a new heart transplant or a triple bypass surgery when one is very elderly, past the normal life cycle, and without any dependents. I know it's a touchy subject, but I think it has to be brought up because besides our nation's unjust foreign wars and our unjust redistribution from those who do work to those who will not, what's bankrupting our children's future is our healthcare system that steals from the young and those who choose to be healthy on behalf of those who choose to be unhealthy and whose death is only slightly delayed with highly expensive treatments that quickly fail. The top two costs driving up health insurance for young families to half of the median family income. This is part of the things pressuring mothers to work, is to have just health insurance coverage for their family. Just to be insured is now nearly half the median income. That doesn't pay for any medical care whatsoever. And the top two costs driving that are preventable illnesses, so like diabetes and obesity, and end-of-life interventions that cannot stop death. And it is wrong and burdensome to steal from young families to slightly prolong the life of someone whose responsibilities to his children are completed. To those of you who are past childbearing years or are physically unable to grow children, but you worry about our culture's hatred of life and the families who nurture it, I want you to know that there's a lot that you can do when your body can no longer, or even if you're barren, cannot generate children. While I have just said some touchy things about old age, I'm going to end with some positive things about old age. One of the things that actually drives me nuts is snide comments about boomers. These have become culturally acceptable, and I think they're completely uncalled for and just plain wrong. And sure, like anyone else, my parents' generation has committed plenty of sins. So have I. But for Christians, all those sins are covered by Jesus' blood. And that blood makes for peace between peoples, between mothers and the children who make our lives difficult, but also more holy, between men and women, and between the old and the young. The standard American way of life for boomers, millennials, and zoomers alike is hostile to our faith. But we can unite in seeing that and in working to bring Christ's mercy and forgiveness to every aspect of our daily lives. So the last thing I'd like to leave you with is an encouragement about the great power that grandparents and the elderly have to benefit the lives of the young. Part of why I hate the anti-boomer rhetoric is because boomers are my parents, my aunts and my uncles, my adopted grandparents at church. They are faithful, blessed, wonderful people who give to me and everyone they encounter. I want anyone who is today here who is a parent or grandparent to hear just how much power God has given you to bless the young and not to be put off by the cultural messaging designed to make you feel ashamed of your age and your vocations. Boomers and Xers can make a difference, and not just by strategically deploying the unprecedented wealth they've laid up on behalf of the next generation, as the Bible commands. They also can and do make a huge difference in giving their time, hands, and friendship. Instead of fading away onto a golf course, parents and grandparents can lend a hand to lift the load of young parents and the otherwise needy in their families and their churches. Your lives matter, and you have a lot to offer that my generation and others younger than you need, even if we sometimes crab about it and have attitudes that need reforming. Ignore that whining just like you would ignore the whining of a toddler and perform your vocational duties to pass down your faith. Oh, you're all experienced with toddlers, huh? Perform your vocational duties to pass down your faith, your experience, your institutions, and your knowledge to the next generation. We need that, and we are grateful, and we need to be more grateful and express that more often. Demographic decline is not a sure death sentence for our culture. Data models can get a lot wrong, as we've seen with, for example, global warming and those ridiculous COVID projections. God is sovereign, and we never need to be afraid to act on that reality. And in fact, I just saw yesterday a graphic that I would have included if I had, had it before yesterday, that showed that among people who are politically leftist, those people are not replacing themselves, but people who are politically right, which is very an overlapping Venn diagram with people who are religious believers, they are replacing themselves. So Christians are, I think we can do better, but Christians are above replacement rate in our culture, and I'm really happy to see that we're going to be taking over the earth as long as we don't let the pagans educate and raise our children. So we do have a future and we do have a hope, no matter what things look like, no matter how many children there are or aren't. And every single life is an expression of eternity, because every human is made in God's image. Thank you all. Thank you. And I'll be opening up to Q&A as long as we are able to do that. I love Q&A. And for those of you who aren't able to make it during Q&A or have a private question you want to ask me after we've concluded that, I'll be at that table over there with some of my books as well for sale. Happy to answer any private questions there. I saw the gentleman in the checkered shirt in the back. Did you have a question?
Where's your farm? Did you grow up on?
I grew up on the family farm in Wisconsin. So my husband and I live in Indiana now. So I'm hemming and hawing here because if people aren't used to Wisconsin, they don't know where it is, but I was 2 hours north of Madison in the middle of nowhere. Did you have a question, sir?
I've been retired from active duty for a little over 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
So I pay close attention to what's going on with our nation's defense and our military structure.
Mm-hmm.
And I see how both two of the topics you touched on are affecting us militarily.
Mm-hmm.
Readiness.
Sure.
And that is the moving of women to frontline combat positions. Where I'm sorry, they have no business doing. Men have quit defending women, but we're depending on them to defend us. And second, are men who, like we talked about, in that age bracket, you say like 25 to...
It was 24 to 50, or 25 to 54.
The most developed muscles in their body are their thumbs.
Yeah.
They couldn't qualify for the military if they had to. I'm wondering if your research has touched on any of that and any thoughts you might have.
I'll repeat the question on the mic. So he is, I believe, a veteran, or you? Yeah. So a veteran has some retired veteran has some concerns about the two items related to the military that touch on the topics I've talked on. One of them is the moving of women to combat positions, and the second one is the fact that the vast majority of our nation, I believe it's 75% at least, are of young people who are of military recruitment age are physically unable to compete the requirements required to just go through basic training. So yes, I do have a few things to say about those. The first one, talking about moving women to combat positions. So I understand that men feel like they have been made to be a second sex, and I believe legally that actually is the case. So, for the so-called anti-discrimination laws, I write about this in my book, we have more than 100 identity politics laws that are basically first started with the feminist laws that create special preferences for women in all kinds of employment. And so just to those have been added the logical outcome of the feminist treatment of men and women as exactly the same, the transgender, anti-discrimination, which is really preferences, government preferences for people who are transgender, who also believe that men and women are interchangeable and the same. So I see a direct line between feminist ideology and transgender ideology, and I explain that in the book. So I understand that men are legally and culturally been placed in the second sex, but I also believe that it's not women who are going to solve that problem. It needs to be the men. Men acquiesce to their own moving to that place, just as Adam acquiesced to his wife disobeying in the Garden of Eden. And so the right thing would be to do is for men to stand up and say, we're not going to do that. We are going to live the way Jesus Christ showed us to live, which is to be a male sacrificial leader. And I don't mean sacrificial like a doormat. So I know like Christian culture has conflated niceness with goodness, and sacrificial husband doesn't mean shutting up every time your wife speaks. Sometimes you need to sacrifice your own comfort by saying things your wife won't like in the most loving way that you can come up with to say it. So we have to be really careful about kind of the language used to say that. So I absolutely am against women being in combat positions in the military because I believe it goes against God's natural design, and I believe it is a shame to the men that they are pushing the women in those positions and allowing them to take those positions and not rising up and getting them out. And so I think that's a problem that the men of this country need to stand up and solve and stop passively whining about how they can't because they're so disadvantaged. Not that I think that, sir, that you are at all like that. So the second item related to there, would you remind me the second item? Oh, right, the military, right. So, correct. So for one thing, I know this may not be popular. I know Colorado is a very military area. Colorado, I actually, a friend's son is in the Air Force Academy right now. Wonderful young man, supremely capable. So there's a lot of wonderful people in the military. But I mean, I think pretty much, actually, this shouldn't maybe be sensitive even to say, because every time I talk to people who are veterans or in the military, they all agree with me that the military is too big, too bureaucratic, wastes too much money. And so we really could right-size the military. We need to return our military commitments to defending America's actual interests. I personally think NATO should be abolished, for one thing. And I know that's sensitive and gets you knocked off the internet, but that's just my position. So there's many other things that need to happen with our military to right-size it that I think could help solve. Well, second item there, we haven't had a recruitment problem since President Trump has come into office. So that's a clear response by the people of this nation that when they have a leader that they feel like has their back, they're more willing to put their lives on the line for him. But the lack of health among young people, my secret or my kind of theory, not theory, but thing that I talk about that I don't hear other people talking about is I actually relate that to the lack of mothers being in the home, because so I feed my children. I mean, I'm not trying to brag here, but I mean, my children get almost completely homemade food. We buy from our local farmers, organic, not everything organic, but we have a CSA for our vegetables. We have a farmer for a lot of our meat. I make, and I grind our wheat, for most of the bread products that we, just as much as I have time to do, all my children get food like that. And that's because I have flexibility at work. But when women are working full-time, they do not have the time to make food from scratch. They do not have time to check and see, wow, Johnny won't eat this, let's work with him on it. Or, so when they are more likely to shove screens in front of children and make them live a sedentary lifestyle just to get them quiet because mama's so tired. So I really think that a lot of the nation's health crisis would be solved if we had encouraged women to be home with their children, because it's mothers paying attention to their children who are more likely to feed them and have the time to feed them meals. I mean, it takes me 25 hours a week to make food for my family. That's a part-time job in itself, right? To make it from scratch. So Americans are very unhealthy, and I mean, the other component to that, of course, is screens, which are an abomination, and we all need to be using them as little as possible, and really encouraging families not to give their children screens, and it should be looked down on. It should be, I mean, I don't think you should go out, there and pour, water on somebody who gives his kid a screen or anything, but I mean, we can discover loving ways to express to them, this is not good for your child, it's not good for your family. We need to, learn different habits of life, and because the screens are another reason that we all are so unhealthy. Do you have any other questions? Yes, the young man there in the striped shirt. Gideon, I think your name is? Hi.
This society recognizing that, I guess, the parents, children need their parents, especially their mother when they're very young, and when mothers do have to work, it's important to have, it'd be great to have more, better get the workplace, on how we put it, like, making for, like, where women could, like, care for children even at work. Do that. So that's my, I can follow through. But I guess in your talk, I guess I was wondering, like, I guess the Apostle Paul talks about 1 Corinthians 7, like, vocational singleness, and how God calls us, all people to be married, also calls people to be single. And Jesus talks about that as well. So where do you see that, like, what's the place for vocational singleness as you see it?
So the question is basically I focused my talk, on family and marriage, because I do think that 90+% of people should seek and are suited for marriage. Because the Apostle Paul talks about the vocation of singleness as being for the gospel, and people who do not have the same, we'll put it politely, for the respect of the children, the desires that would lead to the creation of children. So I think just from that second item, I hear a lot of young people, because our culture, frankly, is really terrible at encouraging and fomenting marriages and getting people together. There's more people single than really would like to be. And so, and then sometimes they feel shamed, right, when we talked about encouraging marriage, because it's very difficult. It's way more difficult now, than it was just 20 years ago to find someone and settle down and start a family. And so, I do think people have individual responsibility for seeking that, but I also think we have a cultural and neighborly responsibility to help and encourage marriages and help people meet each other, and help, like I said, reduce the debt that are obstacles to marriage, encourage people towards careers. For example, if you work at a company or you own a company, try to hire people and be able to provide them, a wage that they could support a family on, so that it is possible for them, and they're not saying, I literally cannot, support a wife and child right now. So I think, of course, I would commend you to ask your pastor this question, or a pastor, would be able to give you, because I think it's partly a theological question, right? How do we understand this verse of the Bible? But from my own catechizing from my husband and pastors, right? My husband is not a pastor, but he plans to get there someday. Talking about this, it seems very clear that the Bible says, first of all, you won't feel, the desire, for marriage, for creation of children, and that is a good signal for you. The second item for people who are called to singleness is the full devotion of their entire lives to the church. So you're not just, and again, sometimes people want to have the vocation of marriage. They don't have either of those two kind of things to know that they should be separated out for the work of the church. They have a desire for marriage and children, but it never materializes, right? Well, there are absolutely places in our churches for people like that, right? There's all kinds of brokenness in the world, just like there's places, in churches for the barren, women who want to have children and are physically unable for it. So what I encourage, for people who are working on trying to lead towards marriage, who have that as a goal, and whether that happens is partly partly under your control and partly not, I would encourage you to try to say, where are ways that I could act as a father in the fathering relationship? Could I mentor young men? Could I be a part of a men's group at church? How can I serve my church? What can I do with the capacities and time and the money that I have to act in a fatherly capacity in a metaphorical sort of way? So Katie Sherman is a good friend of mine. She talks about barrenness very, very well, and so I happen to know her personally, and so she has been unable to have personal children, but she spends so many hours of her weeks and her days, ministering to the young people that her husband pastors at a university in Illinois. So she's making them meals, she's having motherly conversations with them, she's giving them life advice, she's holding their babies, all of these things, acting as a mother, basically adopting people as a mother. So you could also adopt people, as a father, and I would encourage you to give as much of that as you have time in your life to do, because if we have families like mine, where we do have a ton of babies, thanks be to God, we're short of hands, right? So if you want to take my kid to soccer, I would be so happy, or anything else. So there are all kinds of ways that you can give while you're, heading towards having your own family, should God bless you with that. Yes? Do I have a position on natural family planning method? I tried it and it didn't work at all. I've used multiple, different methods for, natural family planning, and, for women who, I have kind of some reticence to kind of talk about this, because I would kind of rather a pastor would do it, but I'll just be open. So my husband and I, that's the only thing we've ever used, right? And clearly we have 6 children in 9 years, right? So, by the time I got to like baby 3, I was thinking, gee, it would be kind of great to slow this down a little bit. We're still open to children, and we haven't had one for 5 years, right? So you never know what you're going to get in terms of babies. I think God likes to use the babies, whether you get them or don't get them, or on whatever schedule it happens, just to show us I'm still God. So for young ladies who are, so for example, women in my life, I found Creighton to be the most effective one that I've tried. And I will also, if you don't mind, I will get really personal, because I think this is so funny. So after our first son, we got one of those little computers that use the temperature. And the reason that I have a third child is because my first child chewed the cord on that, and I didn't know. So I thought I was taking my temperature, but it was actually not working. So don't use that anymore. But I mean, I understand that those are very effective. There are now apps that women use, you know. So where my husband and I have landed on that, and again, I always invite dialogue with your pastors, you know, looking at the official text of the church, as I am not a pastor or theologian, but we want to always be open. I think we always want to be open to life at the point at which it is not a clear and real threat to either our ability to provide for the family or for the mother's life. You know, so there have been seasons in our life where so my sixth baby was kind of a crisis pregnancy for me, just in terms of health. So it is a blessing that we've had a little bit of time to recover, you know, after that baby, just, you know, for ability to take care of all of our children. Again, like if God had given us the 7 children more quickly, we would have figured it out, you know. And the same thing with the finances. We had our first baby, you know, when we had $30,000 in college debt, you know, and one job between us. That's when we got pregnant, right? And so, you know, we paid off that college debt, you know, 2 years later, right? The Lord just took care of it all. So so that's something that's been very helpful for me thinking about babies, because they are a big commitment, especially for the mother. They're a big physical and emotional commitment because your body's tied in with your emotions. Very, very tired, can't remember a thing, and I apologize for people I may have met 3 years ago. I just, like, the babies took it all away from me, right? So maybe just to help me be humble, because I used to have a way better memory. But yeah, so we've used that. So we feel like it's consonant with our beliefs, while at the same time I know that I've never killed a child, thank God. And if I had, I know that He would forgive me. But
The only reason why I would really ask, I love what you said, is because for some women in this modern world, it's a shock the first time you hear that, like a birth control pill is abortifacient. It's
Yeah.
a shock the first time you learn it.
Yeah.
So it's helpful to at least teach other younger women that, you know, God did give us signs in our body that help us know when we're fertile or we're not.
And I will say, knowing my cycle has been so helpful for me in all kinds of other things. So for example, I know when I'm like, oh, I should do a lighter workout. You know, oh, mommy's going to be probably grumpy today. You know, we're not going to have 5 things scheduled, you know. I'm going to have some chocolate and some tea on this day, you know, so that I'm blessing to my family and not punishing them. And this is something, and I don't mind sharing. I mean, I'm working on this with my oldest daughter as well, right? There's certain days you have tea and chocolate so that you can continue to hold your temper and be gracious to people that God has put in your life. So, I mean, just looking ahead, it also just has really helped, because otherwise you'd get kind of caught out and wonder, like, what is going on? I feel so crazy. It is kind of crazy to be a woman. So I thank the men in our lives for loving us, even though we're really crazy. Okay, let's see. We still have time for a few more questions. I saw you earlier.
So, to your medical stuff that you were talking about with the aging and the young and all of that, how do you kind of determine that? I asked someone else with my sister's situation when she was battling cancer. And it got to the point of the treatment was not going to cure it. It was giving time. Her decision was, I'm going to do everything I can. My kids are going to know I'm going to fight to be here. I was thinking, you know, where you're going, why aren't you, you know. And so the person encouraged me by saying that was her statement of faith. That was her profession of faith. She was, so I guess when you were mentioning with the older ones, that I have aging parents, and, you know, they thank me for when my taxes pay for their replacement or their back surgery. So I guess kind of where's your line when you were saying, you know, when do you invest in that with the aging?
Yeah.
And that seems like, that's a fine line.
Well, I think that so she's asking kind of like, where do you find the line on knowing with the aging, when is it time to go, when is it not? So we have to we have to go on what the Bible says, right? The Bible doesn't say, I don't know, at 85, take off, It has some prudential guidelines, and it says, do not fear death. It says death, to live is Christ, to die is gain, right? So it tells us some things, but I want to be very careful not to speak where God has not spoken. And so that's why I actually in this speech called on pastors really to be giving us some more guidance, drawing from what God has said, because I don't think it's my place, to do that. I do think that we as Christians can use our reason informed by Scripture to follow our consciences. So I guess what I was encouraging here is for people to just think about this and to look at their own conscience at the Bible and talk with your pastors and come to a place of, I'll share, my husband and I have already talked about this. While we have young children who require, us who really would be devastated to lose a parent, we're going to do, pretty much everything within reason. Like if somebody gets in a car accident, has cancer, we want to stay there for our children if it is possible, because they, children losing a parent young, it is very hard for them. But basically once our children are adults, we've decided, if it, you can let me go, honey. And that is a prudential decision at the time, right? Because I can't make a blanket say, I don't know how close are you to death at a certain situation. That is totally dependent on the circumstances, and I can't, know ahead of time. But, that is where my husband and I have come. And my dad has also said, like, man, don't keep me, locked up to all the tubes. I'm going to Jesus, just let me go. And I'm like, okay, Dad, right? So it's good. Yeah, obviously, you need your family members to know your wishes. But I would also never violate someone else's conscience by saying, I would never be secretly taking away their heart meds or anything creepy like that, right? That is between them and God. That is their responsibility. And that's pretty much where I, can stand on that. I mean, the Bible does say, the measure of a man's life, 70 and 10 years, so about 70 or so. But again, this doesn't give us hard and fast sorts of things, and so we have to have our conscience informed by the Word of God and try to apply that as best we can in the situation and trust that God will help us. Yes.
Did any of them have colic?
Of my children, did any of them have colic? 4. Yes, I mean, so I also, so colic is, so my 6th child, he didn't sleep longer than 15 minutes for the first 6 months of his life. That was hard. Yes, sir.
You spoke of the need for greater catechesis. As a pastor, I did that in confirmation, and then they would go away to college and come back home atheists.
Yeah.
We tried to get them in part in touch with local campus ministries, also campus ministries. And do you have any other suggestions how to help college students, particularly to retain pro-life values?
So he's, as a pastor, saying, right, and this is a common thing in our churches, catechize, confirm the kids, go off to college, turn into atheists. Actually, I would encourage you to read maybe a book called The Nurture Assumption by Judith Rich. She talks about how children basically attach their identity to either their parents' culture, which us as a Christian home, Christian family home, or to the secular culture, and they mostly make that decision in middle school, she says. And so she talks about that it's a very peer-driven experience. And so that is one reason, for example, that's a very strong reason my husband and I have decided it's Christian schooling or nothing. We had 2 plans for our children when we started to have them. The first one was putting them in a good Christian school, and the second one is what we called our feral children option. And that would be getting them a stack of books and letting them read them, because we thought it would be better than them ending up pagans from going to a place where all of their peers are pagan. And so I know this is difficult, but I mean, the Lutheran Church has a very strong tradition of the parish schools, the Christian schools, and that is for a reason. Our forefathers went, and when they settled lands, they built the church first, and then they built the school, and they sent all their kids to it because they knew that having those peers are so important for children to keep the faith. So obviously you can't I don't need to tell you, you can't force your families to do anything, but you should strongly encourage not only Christian K-12 schooling, but Christian college, if someone goes to college. I know some families who have sent their children to, state universities and such, and they've remained faithful, but those children were living at home and going to their family's home church at the same time, right? And I've also, people put their children in school, or in a school where they have selected a good local church and they are checking in on if the child's going, and they will withdraw the family support for the school if regular church attendance isn't happening. So I think you have to be that serious about it, because we were talking about the faith of your children. There is nothing that matters more in this life than, whether you are fulfilling your responsibility to push them into the faith. I know that you can, God controls who is ending up in heaven, right? I'm not saying, I don't want to put that burden on the conscience of the parents, right? There are parents who put their children in Christian schools, who have a Christian home, who go to, do all the things, and their children walks away from the faith, right? That's in the Lord's hands. Our children are always in the Lord's hands. But it is our duty that the Bible says to raise our children in the Christian faith. And so I think that to the utmost extent possible, Christian schooling should be a part of that. And the reason that is such a formative thing and very important for the children, and I think everybody who has donation monies to give should be supporting Christian education for families, and as our churches always historically have put tons of money into that, and that is the right thing to do. Oh, sorry, I didn't answer the second. So if keeping people Christian in college, I really think it depends on their social circle. So the smart parents that I know, if their child is going to a particular college, if it's not a Christian, or a Lutheran college, but even at the Lutheran colleges, you have to make sure that they're going to church every Sunday. It's not a given that they're going to go. You have to see who are their friends. Their friends are the number one most important thing. And you should, so I'm planning this for my children. I'm going to be visiting them several times a year, going to church with them, checking out their friends. And if their friends are people who are not Christians, who do not support, the Christian way of life, they're either getting new friends or mommy and daddy are not helping pay for school anymore. I feel that strongly about it. Yes. The book is called The Nurture Assumption by a woman named Judith Rich, and she goes through the research that shows how very important the peers are for the retention of the family's values in a culture in which that does not share the family's values. It's a very interesting read. And that's partly why for us, we chose a Christian school because we wanted the peers there. And I will tell you, it's sometimes hard to find great peers, even at Christian schools. If the Christian school isn't great, homeschool those kids, find another school, do what you have to do. The peers really, really matter. And you cannot have if your kid is in, say, cheer or soccer or whatever, and the kids are swearing, if they're making, fun of Christianity, if they have little rainbow pins all over the place, do not put them in that, whatever it is. It is death to their souls. Yes, ma'am. Her comment was, I think the recording of athletes at the Concordias can be a problem. Now, I used to work in college admissions at Hillsdale, and I will say that it's true there as well. Not always, but, sometime. And I have a whole thing about that. I really think that sports should be disentangled from college altogether. I think we should have feeder leagues, for the pro, that like AA, AAA for all the sports, and that really shouldn't be tied to schooling. But we're talking like 100-year project that most Americans would hate me and throw tomatoes at me for pursuing. All right, we're pretty close to our time here. We're at 10:58. So thank you all. If anyone has any more questions, I will see you over at my little booth. And thank you all for coming.